My piece is called A Don't Hurt Me Parade in Portland, now with less parental oversight. The most Portland thing of all at this week's Pride Parade was the guy in the assless denim overalls. It was the epitome of a queer Pacific Northwest mashup. Portland's Pride Parade was in July this year because, while in the entire known universe all of June has been designated Pride Month, Pride Northwest, out of sheer politeness and to, quote, avoid overlapping with other significant cultural events in the Rose City, end quote, moved their signature parade to July. In fact, they moved the 10th annual Portland Trans Pride March into July as well. And last year, the Pride Parade was in July too. Funny that. Is this evidence of Pride Northwest being polite or greedy? Greedy for more attention, more bandwidth from the citizens of Portland, more money from their corporate sponsors. I'm going with greedy. Needy, greedy, and shameless. Pride insists on its countercultural cred while being generic and predictable a majority of the time. The prevailing aesthetic at the parade was, of course, rainbow. Rainbow backpacks and bags, shirts and skirts and pants, sneakers and belts and bows and hats. No item is too small for a rainbow. The parade itself was uninspired. No floats, precious little live music, and few elaborate costumes, except, of course, for the drag queens and the men who think they're women and the men engaging in public kink, on which more later. Mostly it was a bunch of corporations and community organizations signaling their allegiance to the cause. Behind the scenes, allegiance was shown with financial contributions. At the parade, allegiance constituted people co-branded with rainbows and their corporate logos walking, and trucks co-branded with rainbows and their corporate logos driving. Branded rainbowed trucks and branded rainbowed people, sticking it to the establishment. Who precisely is sticking it to the establishment by marching in the parade? Banks and credit unions showed their pride, from Bank of America to U.S. Bank. Delta and Alaska Air were there, as were Marriott, Macy's, and Daimler Truck. Safeway Albertsons brought a truck with a drag queen. Adidas was handing out discount cards to the employees store. Even the Department of Fish and Wildlife felt a need to represent. Pride in the wild, said their banner, while their truck proclaimed, lamprey are older than dinosaurs. True, but irrelevant to the theme of the day. That said, lamprey appear to be pentachromats. Do you know that?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, lamprey appear to be pentachromats, able to see color in greater detail than we can, so they might have some aesthetic advice for the rainbow crowd. The crowd seemed appreciative of all the corporate backing. I heard several attendees murmuring their approval. Look, On Point Credit Union is here. That's so great. Oh, Doc Martens, awesome. Oh, Nordstrom. From print shops to pet hospitals to general contractors, no sector of the economy seemed to be missing. Unions marched in the parade alongside utility companies, as well as the United States Postal Service. Representatives from Portland State University marched, as did Oregon Health Sciences University. As, for that matter, did many healthcare organizations, Kaiser Permanente, Providence, and Randall Children's Hospital among them. A children's hospital. Speaking of which, KinderCare was also there. KinderCare offers daycare for children ages 6 weeks through kindergarten, as well as after-school care for the olders. I'll give them this. They know their audience. There were many small children in attendance, standing on the parade route, waving flags, being pushed in strollers through the crowd. They, too, were bedecked in rainbows. Most of the corporate sponsors handed out swag. Little flags, lollipops, bottles of bubbles. I went to Pride, and all I got was a lousy keychain that says, Vote Love. I don't even know who made it or who they want me to vote for. I suspect that my idea of voting love and theirs will be radically different. During the summer of 2020, when madness was allowed to run wild in many American cities and achieved fever pitch in Portland, many storefronts erected what I dubbed Don't Hurt Me walls. In an often fruitless effort to be spared the vandalism that erupted every night in some parts of the city, store owners would publicize their fealty to the cause. Black Lives Matter posters were nearly ubiquitous. More niche messaging included amplify melanated voices and defund and demilitarize and dismantle police. In his 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless, Václav Havel wrote of a fictional greengrocer who posts a flyer in his window that reads, Workers of the world unite. Havel asks, why does he do it? What is he trying to communicate to the world? Havel answers his own question. I, the greengrocer, live here and I know what I must do. I behave in the manner expected of me. I can be depended upon and am beyond reproach. I am obedient and therefore I have the right to be left in peace. Pride Northwest, the organization that organizes this parade that we're watching here, has effectively compelled a large fraction of the companies that do business in the city to ante up if they hope to be left in peace. Pride Northwest has turned the businesses of Portland into Havel's hapless greengrocer. They have created a Don't Hurt Me parade. In some ways, the parade seemed like Latin American Carnival, but with little of the creativity or authenticity. There were surprises for the eyes around every corner, but it was pretty much all of a type. There was the guide skivvies who thought he was a woman. Actually, there were several of those. There were people wearing COVID-era masks because respiratory viruses are an existential threat to people outdoors, but cross-sex hormones and surgical mutilation for people too young to vote is a birthright. There was a guy wearing a peacock tail and skirt, another in royal purple regalia complete with crown, and several people in stripy knee socks. Some people waved Palestinian flags, and one woman carried a Dykes for Palestine sign. Queer Pagans Unite read another sign. Another, if you're reading this, you're gay. The Portland trans femmes were there, carrying a banner directing interested parties to their Discord server. And a very earnest young man was handing out flyers for the Class Struggle Action Network, which, according to their literature, advocates for such things as, quote, eliminating pay differentials based on category and eradicating the capitalist profit system. They're going to be about as successful as the men who think they can magically turn into women. One thing I didn't see at Pride were zombies. The zombies of Portland and of many American cities now are the walking dead. Their eyes blank, their bodies twisted and hunched, eager for their next fix. Fentanyl leaves husks of people lying in the street, pants around their ankles. It leaves people hanging at the passenger side of rusty cars, crumpled at the curb. And it leaves the most functional of its victims vacant but ambulatory. There were no zombies at Pride. Pride takes its victims a different way entirely. One of the entities in the parade was Portland Pets and Handlers. Listed cryptically in the official parade contingent lineup as PDX PAW, this group comprised doughy men in dog masks and tails, or dressed as other unspecified pets, prancing and holding their hands up and their wrists limp in weak imitation of paws. Some among the attendees were also wearing leather dog masks or tails, or were even more suited up than that. One of the handlers wore a gauzy white skirt and held the reins of the pet, who was dressed scantily in leather and had a bit in his mouth, because that's what pets like. When the Pets and Handlers group came through, I was standing behind a couple of moms and their preschool-aged children. One of the girls was asking to go. Kids get antsy, after all. But her mother insisted they stay. Look, the mom pointed at the PAW group as it approached. The little girl seemed, by her body language, dubious. Then curious, finally riveted. Once the leather straps and bare skin and dog masks and reins and bits and tails were in front of her, she could not look away. Both mothers laughed, apparently delighted, as bondage-dressed middle-aged men gyrated feet from their daughters. It was, after all, a beautiful day, and they were out with their children enjoying the view. What's not to be delighted about? The Portland Gay Men's Choir was also at the parade. Their voices are beautiful. They, along with a smattering of parade attendees, looked like gay men from an earlier time. Fit and trim, mustachioed or clean-shaven, and uniformly good-looking, these men also seemed to be under no illusion about who and what they were. They were fabulous. They seemed to come from an era in which gay men and lesbians were striving for acceptance, to live their lives unaccosted and have the same legal rights as heterosexual couples. In LA in the 1970s and 80s, where and when I grew up, my mother had several artist friends who were gay. David and Richard were the ones who became most familiar in our home. In those days, they couldn't get married, but they were loyal to one another. Family lore suggests that before they came over to our house the first time, my little brother, inquisitive and socially fearless, had some questions about what it meant that two men were in love with one another. But he kept the questions to himself until they arrived. Maybe 4 years old, my brother marched up to David before he had even received his first drink and asked in a clear and ringing voice, "Do you have a penis?" My mother was mortified, but our guests were not. David laughed. "Yes, young man, I do have a penis," he answered my brother. And that was it. My brother had asked a simple question and received a simple answer. There was nothing predatory in the answer, no desire to instruct a child in the ways of homosexuality or indeed in the ways of sexuality of any sort. If there had been, of course, my parents would never again have invited those guests into our home, because protecting children is one of the crucial roles of parents, or at least it used to be. So you can take that off now if you like.
Profoundly disturbing. I think you hit the nail on the head, and it left me with many different observations and threads, and I hardly even know where to start. The claims are insane, and the harms are obvious. That we're actually legitimizing a kind of blurring of distinctions between public and private behavior, right? Like the idea is these people are so oppressed that they have to be hypersexual in public. And then we're blurring a distinction between adult stuff and kid stuff.
Yeah.
And
no, I mean, I think the lowest hanging fruit here is stop saying this is family friendly.
yeah.
That's the lowest hanging fruit. Then you of course have the problem of like, well, it's in a public space and you really can't bring your kids here to, well, if you're giving them a permit to do this thing that is patently not for children, then, you figure out whether or not they get to have that permit and this space is off limits to children for the day, or don't give them the permit. That's the next step. But this is not family friendly. Drag shows in the 70s were understood that they were not family friendly.
Yep.
Right? I do not believe, and I never went to pride parades or drag shows. I went to my first drag show last summer in Portland, actually, the RuPaul's Drag Race thing, which I wrote about in counterpoint to Barbie, the movie. But neither pride parades, I believe, nor drag shows used to be open to children, much less understood to be a place where children were encouraged to come. And you can see in that live stream that we showed in the background while I was reading the piece, how many children were there. And that was just one vantage point. Like I engaged this by moving around a lot, and I stood in a lot of different places. And that vantage point that this live stream was coming from was not unique. There were kids in the parade, and there were kids lining the streets because it's a parade. Of course you take kids to a parade. Not this one.
Well, I mean, it does. The problem is it is parasitizing a pathway. So the oppression of homosexuals was profound.
Yes.
The rebellion against it was necessary to end that phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole thing has been predicated on you're just still prejudiced against these people, and 20 years from now, you will view them the way you view gay folks.
Right.
And it's really not true. But, I mean, I guess the thing that is most disturbing here, I think, is you've got sexuality that doesn't belong in public, coupled with this pet stuff.
So, show my screen here, Zach. This is a little girl looking at one of these so-called pets I think he's got a bodysuit on. He's not naked. And then he's got bondage gear over the bodysuit. He's got something connected to his cock, I think. I can't quite tell in this picture. And he's got a bit in his mouth. And he's got blinders on. And this is the little girl who was at first not interested and then curious and then riveted. How do you look away from that?
So
you can take it off.
There's a thing I try to convey to people. One of the things that just never lands, which is, I mean, you and I talk a lot about development and the way it is really the missing element in almost all discussions about humans and evolution, right? Yeah. Development and how it progresses is how you become a functional adult human, right? Sexual development is like this, except that the observation that children are in a position to make is heavily edited by adults, as it should be.
Yes.
So in a sense, what you were watching in that parade, and I know that this is also a trope, so I say it with awareness of that, right. But this is recruiting for the next generation of freaky, broken people who are ungovernable, right? In this sense, mm-hmm. We all in society, and I'm not talking about polite society, I'm just talking about decent society.
Right.
We have an agreement about sexuality and kids. They don't mix, right? And these people are taking advantage of a claim of oppression in order to deliberately violate that boundary. And they are doing so in a way that cannot help but affect the kids who see it, because they are in a normal process of developing their sexual persona that will emerge in adulthood. And what they see controls that. And that's bad when it's porn, straight, gay, or otherwise.
Yep.
And it's bad when it's people in dog masks and assless chaps.
Yep.
Right? We are misprogramming those very kids.
The men who think they are women and the people literally parading their kinks are yelling about being their authentic selves. But delusion and kink being publicly exhibited seems less authentic than exhibitionist. What passes for authentic at Pride feels by turns generic and corporate. See paper rainbow Kroger branded crowns worn by many in the crowd. And like fetish that has no place in public. Some will argue that exhibitionism is them being their authentic self. But civilization does not mean tolerance for every single urge that people have. Indeed, one of the roles of society is to rein in some of those urges. Universal tolerance is anarchy. Universal tolerance is anarchy. Tolerate, tolerance. This is one of the words that the LGBTQIA++++ people love to throw around, right? That we must be tolerant. And they are borrowing from the actual gay rights movement from decades earlier, and to some degree from the civil rights movement as well, but especially from the gay rights movement. Be tolerant of alternative lifestyles if they do not impact you and have no ability to spread out, have no ability or desire to spread out into the rest of society. Tolerance with limits. Universal tolerance is anarchy. That is just what it is. And so if you really think that tolerance is the answer without limits, then what you are doing is advocating for anarchy, and you are not on the side of those of us who want civilization and want to live in a democratic republic. You're not.
So I want to just correct one term.
Okay.
I agree with what you said, and I'm sure you'll agree with this. They're not borrowing. They're stealing. It feels like borrowing.
What? What did I say? Borrowing
you said
what?
they are borrowing some of the language of the beliefs of the
gay rights
movement and the gay rights movement. And the problem is that they are actually denying those same claims to people who have a legitimate right to them.
Yes.
Right. So the point is, unless you're queer, there's something suspect about the gay part.
My mom's friends, David and Richard, were free to do whatever they wanted in their home. They were not, and they were not the only couple that we knew and about whom I would say that. And we know now many people who are downstream of the efficacy of the gay rights movement to create greater tolerance, not universal tolerance.
Yeah, I like your point about universal tolerance is anarchy. And it's not the anarchy that the anarchists want. It's actual chaos.
It's lawlessness.
Yeah. And it is also, the process of development is naturally one in which a creature does not know what's viable and what works, and what they get positive feedback for gets augmented. And so by carving out an insane landscape of public kink, you are abusing these very children. Just showing it to them, you are causing the way their minds will develop to be altered in a way that they will not be able to help but being party to this. And that is, it's just simply unacceptable. It's a kind of, it's child abuse. It really is.
It is.
And the fact that there's a threat here in which if you don't, you're not going to the parade? Well, I wonder, what's wrong with you? And actually, Monty Python typically are the ones that have nailed this stuff decades in advance. But in this case, it's Seinfeld with the episode where Kramer is marching in the anti-AIDS march, but he doesn't want to wear the ribbon. And a over-the-top crew of, I think, Puerto Rican ribbon-wearing marchers chase him down, and he's last seen being pulled off a ladder as he's trying to escape with his life.
Unribboned.
Right, unribboned, because he was suspect for, drawing any line whatsoever.
So don't hurt me, ribbon.
Yeah, it's a don't hurt me ribbon.